Welcome back to another rapid review with the Gifted Academics team. We are talking CISSN, that is the Certified Sports Nutrition Certification through the ISSN. So if you're prepping for that exam or just simply looking to learn more about sports nutrition in general, you are in the right place. Today, we are taking some slides out of Chapter 8. We're going to be discussing the basics of exercise testing. When we start with exercise testing, there's one delineation that we want to make from the jump, and that is the difference between a field test and a lab test. Simply put, easy to remember. Don't get any multiple choice. If you are sitting for the CISSN exam, don't get these ones wrong. Field test can be performed, you guessed it, in a field, where a laboratory test is often performed in a laboratory. So for a lot of research, we're going to be using lab tests. For more of your applied, working with teams, working in the field of sports nutrition, working in sports, you're going to do more field testing. Pros and cons of both. Let's look at those first. So pros and cons of your field tests, relatively simple. On the pro side, low cost, minimal equipment, can absolutely simulate a competition environment. Let's say you are working with a track and field team. A great field test would be the 1,600 meter time trial. All you need is 1,600 meters. You can have a track, you can have them run it on flat ground, you can really have them do it whatever. It's low cost, zero equipment, and it directly simulates a competition environment, especially for your 1,600 meter runners. The cons of your field test is going to be it's less reliable. And that's largely due to unpredictable conditions. So weather, ambient temperature, conditions for the athlete, a lot of that can be an issue in terms of the reliability. So trying to control for those is your best bet if you are using a field test like that. Some other cons there, prediction equations. If you are, let's say, doing some VO2 testing, VO2 test a large group of individuals, a field test is your best bet. But a lot of times something like a 12-minute run or a Cooper test will require a prediction equation. Put the result into a prediction equation, it gives you a rough number of what the VO2 max could be, whereas in a lab test, I am directly hooking you up to a spirometer, measuring CO2 and O2 to get a very, very accurate VO2 readout. How much do your athletes, how much does the group that you're working with, the situation that you're working in, require exact testing results like that? Because if you're testing it's preseason testing for a high school team of cross-country athletes and you want to get a rough starting point for VO2 max, a Cooper test is completely fine. But if you're measuring the effect of a supplement on a group's VO2 max over a 12-week training intervention, and you're reporting that data, you want it to be as accurate as possible. You would opt for something like a lab test. And that's the number one pro that we see on the lab test. Higher accuracy, we're using more advanced equipment, the environment is often far more controlled, and the results that you're going to get are far more reliable. And we'll go into definitions on reliability, validity, things like that in the point below. That's the next most important thing from these slides. The cons of a lab test, the equipment is incredibly expensive, often thousands, tens of thousands, even up to hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it doesn't really simulate a competition environment. There's no competition environment where a Tour de France cyclist is going to sit on a bike ergometer with a spirometer on or a VO2 mask on and cycle to exhaustion. It just doesn't match up with the competition environment. So yes, it can give you good baseline numbers. It can tell you how a training intervention is working in terms of improvements in those figures, but it doesn't do the best job of simulating a competition environment. So take what you will there. Pros and cons of both field tests and lab tests. You really want to apply it at the right time to the correct population to get the most out of it. It's not a matter of lab tests are better because they're more accurate, they use fancier equipment, or field tests are better because you can do them anywhere, anytime with larger athletes. Throughout your career as an exercise physiologist, as a sports nutritionist, chances are you'll take advantage of both field tests and lab tests depending on the situation. Now, the next most important part for the CISSN exam is simply understanding the difference and the definitions of validity and reliability. Validity is that a test measures what it claims to actually measure. A vertical jump measures lower body power. That is a valid test. A vertical jump is a valid test of lower body power. A 1 rep max bench press is a valid test of upper body pressing strength. That is how you create a valid test. A Cooper test, a 12-minute run for max distance, is not a valid test for lower body strength. It doesn't test that. We're not looking at lower body strength when we do a Cooper test. We're often looking at aerobic power, specifically in the modality of running. So if you were to come to me and say, I'm going to test my athlete's lower body strength using a 5-minute max air squats for reps. Again, it's not a valid test of lower body power or lower body strength. You're using the lower body, but not in the correct format. Reliability means that a test produces consistent and measurable results. Think of something like a 40-yard dash. Have an athlete run 10 40-yard dashes with the correct rest intervals, and you'll get some very reliable results. They'll be consistent, they'll be measurable. So we want a test to be both valid and reliable when we're tracking data on our athletes over time. But a test can be reliable without being valid. So again, just sticking with the 40-yard dash. If I were to use the 40-yard dash as a way to measure upper body endurance, not a valid test, regardless of the fact that it's going to give me reliable results. So know the two definitions there, be able to differentiate between the two. Probably see a multiple choice question to the effect of, which of the following will be an example of a valid test of lower body power? Or from the data set below, which of the following best represents a reliable test? So you'll want to know the definitions there. Now, one more definition to know here is going to be specificity, and that comes down to choosing the right test for an athlete. So a grip strength test prior to a vertical jump oriented program. You've got, a basketball team that you're working with. You want to measure their vertical jump performance over time. How does it change over an 8-week, 12-week training program that you've written up for them or that you're supervising for them? And you do a grip strength test. It's not specific. It's not the right test to what we're actually measuring. This also applies to modality. A marathon runner should always be tested on a treadmill. If we're looking at, can you test them on a cycle, on a bike if they're injured, or maybe a rower, or maybe a swim if they're in a PT program, they're recovering from injury? Yes, for sure. But that's not the best choice of test in terms of specificity. Marathon runners, if all else held consistent, no injuries, nothing holding them back, a marathon runner, if you're testing their VO2 max, their aerobic capacity, it should be done via running. It should not be on a cycle ergometer, it should not be swimming, should not be on a rower, anything like that. Now, 2 slides here. Whoa, crazy. Usually we just do 1 slide if you're a veteran around here. But let's look at some common testing measures. So now we kind of know what the tests are going to look like, what tests we have to choose from. How do I choose a valid or a reliable test? How do I make sure that the test is specific to the population that I'm working with and the outputs that I'm looking to measure? Here are those outputs that you are trying to measure. Aerobic capacity, that's going to apply to things like long distance running. Anaerobic capacity, that's more of your sprint sports, anywhere in that 30-second to 2 minutes of hard or all-out effort. Soccer, field hockey, short distance running, track and field. Muscular force, so strength as well as a velocity component, because we're measuring force, something like American football. Absolute strength, that's an easy one. Powerlifting. Some people might say, how about absolute strength for Olympic weightlifting? Yes, sort of, but we're also looking at power output there as well, which is why it's funny that powerlifting is called powerlifting and weightlifting is called weightlifting. Powerlifting not being really a sport of power, more so absolute strength. So is there an absolute strength component in Olympic weightlifting? Absolutely. Is it a pure strength sport? It is not. Now, when we look at muscular power, shot put, discus, again, accelerating an object as far as fast as you possibly can. And then you've got sports that have a flexibility component as well, things like gymnastics, things like mixed martial arts. So when you sit down to put together a needs analysis for an athlete, part of that process is going to involve testing. And within that testing, you are going to have to identify the physiological measures or factors that we are actually looking for in these tests. So when you sit down and you say, okay, I've been assigned, what's an obscure sport? Water polo. It's pretty obscure. Sorry if you play water polo and it's, the light of your life, but it is an obscure sport. So we look at water polo. Might say, what are the most physiological factors, the most important physiological factors in the sport? And I'm just making this up, but you might say, okay, these are athletes that are powerful. They have to have a certain degree of aerobic capacity, and they need to be flexible. And then you're going to choose valid and reliable tests based on that. Okay, I'm going to use a Cooper test for my aerobic capacity, muscular power. I'll use a ballistic bench press test. And then for flexibility, we'll use a simple sit and reach test. Again, all valid tests. They're going to test what they're supposed to. They'll give you reliable results, and they'll allow you to get a baseline for your athletes that can be revisited after whatever training intervention it is that you are imposing upon them. So this is a huge part of the needs analysis phase of any athletes. This slide right here being very important for the test, as you will see multiple choice questions that say, which of the following tests would be a valid measure of anaerobic capacity or a valid test of absolute strength. And you're going to have to differentiate and say, okay, it's not if it's absolute strength, okay, it's not the running, it's not the sit and reach, 1 RM back squat, that's absolute strength. Boom, you choose that one, you get that one right. A little bit of applied knowledge on the stuff that's coming out of this chapter, not so much basic recall outside of those definitions we discussed on the previous slide. But if you take your time, if you work through this, and if you think and apply these things to sports that maybe you've played or athletes that you've worked with in the past, it will all make sense, and you'll breeze through this on your way to a 100% a passing score and your CISSN certification. We will see you on the next one. Good luck in your studies.